Good morning, everyone. This is John with Gun.Deals. Today we are talking about the Gideon Optics Judge XL. Before we get into that, go ahead and like, share, and subscribe, as that is all free and helps us out quite a bit. And go ahead and comment your favorite micro, macro red dot in the comments down below. Now, full disclosure on these optics, I did not request these from Gideon. However, they sent me a care package of 3 of them. Either someone at Gun.Deals gave them my address, or they had my address on file, and they sent them to me without me requesting them. A bold move, to be sure, but at least in this case, it's not too bad. Getting into basics of the Gideon Judge XL, we have a RMSc footprint, which is the smaller footprint, generally designed for smaller 9mm, 1.5 stack guns, slimline guns, some 2011s, but basically anything that requires a much smaller mounting footprint. That's usually what you get with an RMSc. However, this being the Judge XL, this is a pretty big window, in fact, comically large window when compared to the rest of the body. So you still get a competition-focused window in terms of size on a very small RMSc body, which looks a little funny, but it does work. The window itself, which is the main selling point of the optic, is 28 by 22 millimeters, which is a pretty good size for a full-size optic, not to mention an RMSc. It's still slightly under some of the truly big dog optics out there, but it is a very good size. Now, as far as rest of the features, the body itself is made out of the stronger 7075 T6 aluminum. On the right-hand side of the body, we have a battery tray for our 1632 battery, which promises probably somewhere between 10 and 30,000 hours of battery life. At the back of the optic, we have a iron sight notch, which is helpful if a bit optimistic. Then we have our windage and elevation, which actually have fairly decent clicks in 1 MOA increments. The Judge XL does come in both red and green variations. I have the 6 MOA red version. Talking about the dot and glass, the Judge XL comes in 2 variations, a 6 MOA green and a 6 MOA red variant. I have the red variant here. The glass itself actually looks very good. There is a little bit of a blue notch filter. There is a little magnification, a little warp, but overall very good for the price point. The dot itself is decent looking. I have a very mild stigmatism, and usually the bigger dots will look a little bit better. So depending on your specific set of eyes, it may or may not look good to you. For mine, it does look pretty good. Personally, I prefer the smaller dots. 2 MOA, 3 MOA, something like that is generally my preferred. 6 MOA is perfectly fine, and for fast, quick shooting, it's really not that relevant. It's just a preference sort of thing. Now, the last important specification is going to be price, and these come in at a little bit over $200, and that puts it underneath Holosun, the Vortex Defender XL, a lot of the sort of mid-tier brands you could say, but it is also not the cheapest out there. I think Siley is undercutting them by $50 to $100 on most models. That being said, the performance of the dot when actually shooting it, I took it on several range trips, plus ran a complete competition with it, and it performed just fine except for one little thing, and this actually happened twice. So on one of the range trips with the Judge XL, the screw for the battery tray completely disappeared in the middle of the session, so my dot died, and I had no idea what was going on until I checked the battery tray, and it was sticking out about 1/4 inch or so, meaning that it had lost contact, and the screw was nowhere to be found. Very unfortunate, because it is a very, very small screw.
The screw for the battery tray flew out.
Fortunately, I had another optic with a similar battery tray that used the same type of screw, so I was able to simply steal one from one optic to put it on this one. The problem was that, again, at the end of the next session, the battery tray had again worked itself loose. So I'm not sure if the threads on this one are just a little bit out of spec, or if I might need to put a little bit of blue Loctite on a very small screw, so you need to be very careful with torque, especially on steel into aluminum with very fine threads. So a bit of an issue that they might need to look into how to resolve that. Issues aside, when it comes to actually using the Judge XL, it performs very well. I don't have a problem picking up the dot. I like the big forgiving window, and it's not the biggest window on the market. If you're using a full-size gun that can take RMR footprints, you do have access to even bigger optics if you want a truly competition-focused optic. If you're stuck, for whatever reason, with an RMSc footprint, this might be one of the bigger windowed RMSc optics on the market, which does make it novel and interesting from that perspective. So again, if you have a gun that has an RMSc footprint without an adapter plate for RMR or whatnot, this is a option for you that's going to get you about 90 to 95% of the way there in terms of size. Now again, my personal preference is to a slightly smaller dot. I prefer 2 to 3 MOA. 6 MOA is a little bit bigger. However, running it at speed in a competition, was it an issue at all? No. In terms of durability, I do not believe this would compete with almost any other optic out there. You have a very thin hole over a very large window for the body size. The window itself is not really even supported by the body, as it does have this big cantilever section on the front. So in terms of durability, probably not great, but again, this is a competition-focused optic, or a performance-focused optic, if you will. So I'm not really too worried about its drop test duty grade durability, and if you are worried about that sort of thing, there are optics for that exact use case. So if you were to ask me, John, would you buy the Gideon Judge XL? No, I would not, because I am not the target audience for the optic. In fact, the reason why I'm holding the optic right now and it's not mounted to my competition gun is because I have access to full-size dots on my main pistol, so I'm not stuck with the RMSc footprint. So for me, I would never choose this over a 507 comp. However, if I were to pick up a specific gun for review or whatnot that only had an RMSc footprint, this might be a interesting optic to look at if I'm looking for the biggest window possible on the smallest body possible. The only thing that I would change is some sort of update to their battery tray, and I would probably add a very small amount of blue Loctite to the battery tray screw and be very careful with how much torque I put in there. That about wraps it up on the Gideon Judge XL big windowed RMSc footprint optic. Let me know what you think of it down in the comments down below. And with all of that out of the way, gentlemen, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I will see you in the next one. Peace off. And so we're riding up a little bit here, which I don't like, and I just drove those way down. Yeah, you can come out.
Stand by.